Marcus had never slept through the night, never felt peace in the darkness that didn't bring terror. For 3 years after returning from Afghanistan, the decorated Marine lived in constant fear, trapped in a world where every shadow held an enemy and every sound meant danger. When his family finally found him barricaded in his apartment, Marcus was huddled in the corner of his bedroom, trembling so violently his entire body shook with memories of explosions that never stopped echoing in his mind. No one could reach him. No one could calm the nightmares. Every attempt to help was met with panic attacks so severe he'd black out for hours. Therapists tried traditional methods, medications dulled the edges but never touched the core, and his family watched helplessly as the man who once led soldiers through combat zones couldn't even walk to his mailbox without breaking into cold sweats. Then a 17-year-old girl named Luna Rodriguez did something no one expected, and what she did shocked everyone and gave Marcus his life back. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of the Mountain View Veterans Center as Luna stepped out of her beat-up Honda Civic. At 17, she was the youngest volunteer the center had ever accepted, but her grandmother's stories about her great-uncle's struggles after Vietnam had planted something deep in her heart. Today was supposed to be orientation, learning about PTSD support programs and basic interaction guidelines. But the moment she walked through those heavy glass doors, she saw the worried expression of Director Patricia Williams, a woman who had dedicated 20 years to helping veterans transition back to civilian life. With a grave nod, Williams motioned for Luna to follow her down a corridor lined with inspirational posters and photos of success stories. The familiar sounds of group therapy sessions and quiet conversations echoed from various rooms, but when they reached their destination at the end of the hall, there was only heavy silence. Behind a reinforced door marked with extra privacy warnings, Williams paused and turned to Luna with an expression that mixed hope with deep concern. In the shadows of the isolated room, Luna saw him, a powerfully built Marine in his late 20s, pressed against the far wall like he was trying to disappear into the paint itself. His broad shoulders were hunched forward, his head lowered so far down that his chin nearly touched his chest, and his entire body trembled with an intensity that made the air itself feel electric with trauma. His hands were clenched into fists so tight his knuckles had gone white, and even from across the room, Luna could see the rapid, shallow breathing of someone caught in an endless panic attack. Luna felt her chest tighten as she observed Marcus through the reinforced glass window. This wasn't just another veteran struggling with readjustment issues. The way he pressed himself against the wall, the way his eyes darted frantically around the room searching for threats that existed only in his memory, the way he flinched at every small sound from the hallway. This was a man whose mind was still trapped in a war zone 3,000 miles away. Director Williams spoke in hushed tones about Marcus's history. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, leading reconnaissance missions through some of the most dangerous territory in Helmand Province. His unit had been caught in an IED explosion that killed 3 of his closest friends and left him buried under rubble for 6 hours before rescue arrived. The physical wounds had healed, but the psychological ones had only deepened with time. Since returning stateside, he'd been through 4 different therapists, tried every medication protocol the VA recommended, and spent 2 months in an intensive inpatient program. Nothing worked. If anything, Marcus seemed to be getting worse. He'd stopped leaving his apartment entirely 3 months ago, surviving on grocery deliveries and the occasional visit from his worried sister. The family had finally convinced him to try the Veterans Center as a last resort, but even getting him through the front door required 2 paramedics and a mild sedative. Now, 3 days into his stay, he hadn't spoken a single word to anyone. He ate only when alone, slept maybe 2 hours at a time, and spent most of his day scanning the room for escape routes and potential threats. Williams explained that Marcus had been a natural leader in the military, the kind of soldier other Marines looked up to when situations got desperate. His unit called him Steady Chen because nothing seemed to shake his calm determination under fire. But that same intensity that made him an exceptional soldier had become his prison. He couldn't turn off the hypervigilance, couldn't stop analyzing every person as a potential enemy, couldn't convince his nervous system that the war was over. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Luna listened carefully, absorbing every detail while watching Marcus through the window. She noticed things the director hadn't mentioned, how he positioned himself with a clear view of both the door and the window, how his breathing changed when footsteps passed in the hallway, how his shoulders tensed whenever voices grew loud in adjacent rooms. This man's survival instincts were operating at maximum capacity 24 hours a day, and his body was exhausting itself trying to stay ready for battles that would never come. The center had tried group therapy sessions, but Marcus couldn't handle being around other people. They had attempted one-on-one counseling, but he shut down the moment anyone tried to discuss his experiences. Peer support from other veterans triggered him even worse, reminding him too much of the brothers he'd lost. Williams looked at Luna with a mixture of desperation and hope, wondering if fresh eyes might see something they'd all missed. Luna studied Marcus's behavioral patterns through careful observation over the next 2 days, and what she discovered revealed the true complexity of his condition. This wasn't simply PTSD or survivor's guilt. This was a complete fracturing of his ability to distinguish between past and present, between safety and danger, between war zone and home. Every therapeutic approach had failed because they were treating symptoms while the core wound remained untouched. The center's traditional methods focused on talking through trauma, processing memories, and developing coping mechanisms. But Marcus's mind had constructed an elaborate defense system that made verbal communication impossible. Whenever someone tried to engage him in conversation about his experiences, his breathing would become so rapid and shallow that he'd hyperventilate. When therapists attempted exposure therapy or guided visualization, he'd dissociate completely, his eyes going blank as his consciousness retreated somewhere unreachable. Luna noticed that Marcus's triggers weren't random. They followed a precise pattern based on his military training. Loud noises sent him diving for cover, because his brain interpreted them as incoming mortars. Sudden movements in his peripheral vision made him spin toward potential threats. Even the well-meaning approaches of counselors activated his combat reflexes because his nervous system couldn't differentiate between friend and foe anymore. The very survival mechanisms that had kept him alive in Afghanistan were now destroying his ability to live in peace. What disturbed Luna most was realizing that Marcus was still actively fighting a war inside his own mind. While his body sat in the safety of the Veterans Center, his consciousness remained pinned down in that rubble-filled crater where his friends had died. He wasn't avoiding his trauma. He was reliving it constantly, every moment of every day. The trembling wasn't fear. It was his body's response to being in a perpetual state of combat readiness. The medical staff had interpreted his silence as depression or emotional shutdown, but Luna began to suspect something different. Marcus wasn't refusing to communicate. He was communicating in the only language his traumatized mind remembered, the silent, hyper-alert body language of a soldier behind enemy lines. His positioning, his breathing, his constant scanning of the environment weren't symptoms of illness. They were the survival behaviors of someone whose mind believed he was still in mortal danger. This revelation changed everything Luna thought she knew about helping him. Traditional therapy assumed he needed to talk about the war to heal from it. But what if he needed to learn how to leave the war behind first? What if his healing required not processing the trauma, but finding a way to signal to his nervous system that the battle was finally over? After witnessing 3 more failed therapy sessions where Marcus became increasingly agitated, Luna approached Director Williams with an idea that made the experienced counselor raise her eyebrows in skepticism. Instead of trying to get Marcus to talk about his trauma or process his memories, Luna wanted to try something that had never been attempted at the center before. She wanted to communicate with him using military protocols, not to trigger his combat responses, but to provide a bridge between his war mind and civilian reality.
Williams initially resisted the suggestion. Luna had no military background, no formal training in PTSD treatment, and was barely out of high school. The idea of a teenager attempting to reach a combat veteran when trained professionals had failed seemed not just unlikely, but potentially dangerous. Marcus's episodes were unpredictable and intense. What if Luna's amateur approach made things worse? What if she accidentally triggered a violent flashback? But Luna persisted with a quiet determination that reminded Williams of her own early days working with veterans. She explained her theory. Marcus wasn't broken or sick. He was a soldier who had never received proper orders to stand down. His mind was stuck in active duty mode because no one had spoken to him in the language his trauma-altered consciousness could understand. Every civilian approach, no matter how well-intentioned, registered as foreign and potentially threatening to his hypervigilant nervous system. Luna proposed sitting with Marcus not as a counselor or helper, but as someone willing to meet him exactly where he was, in that perpetual state of military alertness. She wouldn't try to coax him back to civilian thinking. Instead, she would demonstrate through her own behavior that the area was secure, that no immediate threats existed, that he could begin the process of standing down from high alert. She would use military terminology, respect his need for positional awareness, and most importantly, never approach him as someone trying to fix him. The approach was completely contrary to established therapeutic practices. Most treatment protocols emphasized helping veterans transition away from the military mindset. Luna wanted to temporarily step into that mindset with him. She requested permission to spend time in Marcus's room without any agenda except demonstrating consistent, non-threatening presence. No therapy goals, no progress markers, no attempts at breakthrough moments. Just patient, respectful coexistence until his nervous system began to recognize safety. Williams finally agreed to a trial period, but only under strict supervision. Luna would have 30 minutes daily with Marcus, with staff monitoring through the observation window. If Marcus showed any signs of increased distress, or if Luna appeared to be in any danger, the sessions would end immediately. It was an unprecedented experiment that made everyone involved nervous, but traditional methods had already failed completely. Luna entered Marcus's room for the first time on a Tuesday morning, moving with deliberate slowness and keeping her hands visible at all times. She didn't announce herself or attempt eye contact. Instead, she positioned herself against the wall perpendicular to Marcus, giving him a clear view of both her and the door. Her posture mirrored his, alert but not aggressive, ready but not threatening. Marcus's breathing quickened initially, but when Luna made no attempt to approach or speak, his hypervigilance remained at its baseline level without escalating. For the first week, Luna simply sat. She adopted the same scanning patterns Marcus used, occasionally glancing toward the door and window in a rhythm that matched his own security checks. She never pulled out notebooks or recording devices that might signal she was studying him. When sounds echoed from the hallway, she would tilt her head slightly in acknowledgement, demonstrating that she too was monitoring potential threats. Marcus watched her carefully during these moments, and Luna noticed his breathing would fractionally slow when her responses matched his assessment of each sound's threat level. Day 8 brought the first breakthrough. A maintenance worker dropped a metal toolbox in the adjacent room, creating a sharp banging sound that sent Marcus diving toward the floor. But instead of remaining down or calling for help, he looked toward Luna to gauge her response. She had dropped to a crouch position, not full cover like Marcus, but clearly reactive to the potential threat. When the maintenance sounds continued in a normal pattern, Luna slowly returned to her seated position. Marcus remained on the floor for several more minutes, but his eyes stayed focused on Luna rather than frantically scanning for danger. By the second week, subtle changes emerged in Marcus's behavior during their sessions. His trembling decreased when Luna was present, not disappearing entirely but becoming less severe. He began timing his movements to coordinate with hers. When she shifted position, he would wait a few seconds, then adjust his own posture. When she took slow, deep breaths during particularly triggering moments, His breathing pattern would gradually synchronize with hers. These weren't conscious decisions, but automatic responses from a nervous system beginning to recognize a trusted ally. The third week revealed more significant progress. Marcus started positioning himself where he could see Luna more clearly while maintaining his security perimeter. When she entered the room, his initial tension spike would resolve faster. Most remarkably, he began making small sounds, not words, but the subtle clicks and exhales that soldiers use for silent communication in hostile territory. Luna learned to respond appropriately, acknowledging his signals with barely perceptible nods that confirmed she understood his meaning. On the 23rd day, everything changed during what started as a routine session. Luna had settled into her usual position against the wall when the building's fire alarm system malfunctioned, sending piercing electronic shrieks echoing through every room. The sound was identical to the base alarm that had warned of incoming rocket attacks in Afghanistan, and Marcus's response was immediate and terrifying. He threw himself against the far wall, his body convulsing with memories of explosions and chaos, his breathing becoming so erratic that his lips began turning blue from lack of oxygen. But instead of running for help or trying to calm him with words, Luna did something that shocked everyone watching through the observation window. She moved to the center of the room, dropped into a perfect military crouch, and began using hand signals, the same tactical communications Marcus would have used with his unit during enemy contact. Her gestures were precise. Enemy contact unknown, maintain position, assess threat level, await orders. She had spent weeks researching military protocols online, memorizing the silent language soldiers used when voices might give away their location. Marcus's wild eyes locked on to Luna's hands, and for the first time since arriving at the center, his combat training worked for him instead of against him. His breathing began to regulate as his mind shifted from chaotic panic into familiar tactical mode. Luna continued signing, perimeter secure, no immediate threats, all clear for movement. She held her position until Marcus's trembling decreased, then slowly transitioned to the next signal, stand down from high alert, area secured, mission complete. The transformation was immediate and profound. Marcus didn't just calm down, he actively chose to trust Luna's assessment of the situation. When she signaled that the alarm was a false positive and the area was secure, he believed her in a way he had never believed any therapist or counselor. His nervous system, which had been trapped in perpetual combat mode, finally received orders it could accept. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus allowed himself to stand down from maximum alertness. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. As the maintenance crew disabled the faulty alarm and silence returned to the building, something unprecedented happened. Marcus looked directly at Luna and spoke his first words since arriving at the center. "All clear, Corporal?" His voice was hoarse from disuse, but the question carried the weight of genuine trust. Luna maintained her military bearing as she responded, "All clear, Staff Sergeant. Area is secure." Marcus nodded once, a sharp military acknowledgement, and for the first time since Afghanistan, he allowed his shoulders to relax completely. That moment marked the end of Marcus's psychological imprisonment and the beginning of his journey back to the world of the living. Over the following weeks, Marcus's transformation accelerated in ways that amazed the entire Veterans Center staff. Having established trust through military protocol, Luna began gradually introducing civilian elements into their communication. She would start sessions with proper tactical signals, then slowly transition to normal conversation as Marcus's nervous system remained calm. His vocabulary expanded beyond military terminology, and he began asking questions about the outside world, what month it was, what had happened in the news, whether his sister was still worried about him. The nightmares that had plagued Marcus for 3 years began changing dramatically. Instead of endless loops of the IED explosion and his friends' deaths, he started dreaming about successful missions, moments of camaraderie with his unit, and surprisingly, conversations with Luna where she helped him navigate confusing civilian situations. His sleep patterns improved from 2-hour fragments to stretches of 4, then 6 hours of relatively peaceful rest. The dark circles under his eyes faded, and his hands stopped shaking during daylight hours. Most significantly, Marcus began expressing interest in activities beyond survival. He asked Luna about her plans for college, shared stories about his pre-military life working in his family's restaurant, and even smiled when she told him about her grandmother's collection of vintage military photographs. These conversations revealed the person Marcus had been before trauma rewired his entire existence. Intelligent, caring, naturally protective of others, with a dry sense of humor that had sustained his unit through difficult deployments. Luna recognized that Marcus was ready for the next crucial phase, learning to navigate civilian environments without losing the progress they'd achieved. She proposed a graduated plan that would honor his military mindset while expanding his comfort zone. They would start with brief walks around the Veterans Center, with Luna serving as his spotter, military terminology for a trusted partner who watches for threats while the primary person focuses on the mission objective. Their first venture outside his room lasted only 10 minutes, but Marcus successfully walked the length of the hallway without a panic attack. He maintained his tactical awareness, noting exit routes and potential cover positions, but he didn't retreat to his room when other people appeared in the corridors. Luna's presence provided the security backup his nervous system needed to take these calculated risks. Within a month, they had progressed to visits to the center's cafeteria during off-peak hours, then to the outdoor courtyard where Marcus could feel natural sunlight on his face for the first time in almost a year. Each expedition built his confidence that the world beyond his room wasn't necessarily hostile territory requiring constant defensive measures. The day of Marcus's ultimate test arrived 6 months after Luna first entered his room. He had requested something that stunned everyone at the Veterans Center. He wanted to visit the local military cemetery to pay respects to his fallen unit members. This wasn't just about leaving the safety of the center. It meant confronting the deepest source of his trauma while surrounded by reminders of everything he had lost. Director Williams was hesitant, but Marcus had shown such consistent progress that she agreed to the supervised visit. Luna accompanied Marcus on the 40-minute drive to Arlington Heights Memorial Cemetery, watching as he observed the changing landscape through the passenger window. His breathing remained steady, his hands relaxed on his lap rather than clenched in defensive fists. When they arrived at the cemetery gates, Marcus paused for a long moment, his eyes scanning the rows of white headstones that stretched across the manicured hills. For a brief second, Luna worried he might retreat back into his protective shell. Instead, Marcus squared his shoulders, in a gesture that reminded Luna of the leadership posture she'd seen in his military photographs. He walked purposefully toward the section reserved for Afghanistan casualties, moving with the measured pace of someone completing an important mission rather than the frantic urgency of someone trying to escape danger. At each grave marker of his unit members, Marcus knelt and spoke quietly. Not the desperate apologies Luna expected, but respectful military reports updating his friends on his recovery progress. When he reached the memorial wall listing all casualties from his deployment, Marcus did something that brought tears to Luna's eyes. He placed his hand on the engraved names and spoke in his clear, strong voice. "Mission complete, brothers. I'm going home now." The words carried finality, not just about visiting the cemetery, but about his long journey back from the psychological battlefield where he had been trapped. The drive back to the center was filled with comfortable silence. Marcus looked out the window with genuine curiosity rather than hypervigilant scanning, commenting on changes in the neighborhood and asking Luna about her college application process. When they pulled into the Veterans Center parking lot, he turned to her with an expression of gratitude mixed with something that looked remarkably like peace. That evening, Marcus called his sister for the first time in over a year. Their conversation lasted 3 hours, filled with laughter, tears, and detailed plans for his transition to independent living. Luna listened from the hallway as Marcus described his recovery process, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had successfully completed the most difficult mission of his life. He was finally ready to rejoin the world, not as a damaged veteran hiding from his past, but as a survivor who had learned to carry his experiences without being crushed by their weight. 2 years later, Luna received a phone call that filled her heart with overwhelming pride. Marcus had not only successfully transitioned to independent living, but he had enrolled in a counseling psychology program specializing in military trauma. His unique understanding of combat-related PTSD, combined with his personal recovery experience, made him extraordinarily effective at reaching veterans whom traditional therapy had failed to help. Marcus had established the Silent Service Protocol, a revolutionary therapeutic approach based on the military communication methods Luna had pioneered with him. Veteran centers across 3 states were implementing his techniques, achieving breakthrough results with patients who had been considered untreatable. The program's success rate was unprecedented. 87% of participants showed significant improvement within 6 months, compared to traditional therapy's 32% success rate for severe PTSD cases. But the most remarkable development came when Marcus invited Luna to co-present their methodology at the National Veterans Mental Health Conference. Standing before an audience of hundreds of medical professionals, the former teenager who had trusted her instincts over established protocols watched as her unconventional approach was formally adopted into clinical practice guidelines. During their presentation, Marcus shared something that brought the entire auditorium to silence. "Luna didn't just save my life. She taught me that healing doesn't always require forgetting the warrior. Sometimes it requires honoring that warrior while learning when the battle is over." Today, Luna is completing her doctorate in trauma psychology while continuing to work with Marcus at their joint practice. Together, they've helped over 200 veterans reclaim their lives, proving that sometimes the most profound healing comes from the most unexpected sources. Their story demonstrates that courage, patience, and genuine understanding can triumph over even the deepest wounds. If this journey of transformation inspired you, please subscribe to witness more stories of hope overcoming despair. Share this message with someone who believes in the power of human connection to heal what seems impossible to repair.